Be patient a moment. I just need to get a bunch of cables out here. So as Brian mentioned, my name is Michael Brooks, out of Vancouver, Canada. Largely worked with Phil for the past 4 years. So Docs, BlackBerry, you can attribute to me in some form. A little bit of Cordova CLI, a little bit of Medic, the PhoneGap CLI. And so, as many of you are aware, with PhoneGap 3.0, we're now shipping the entire thing through the CLI. All right. So my entire talk is actually on using the PhoneGap CLI. I imagine a lot of you have already used it for a little bit, but I'll just run through it for you. And if you have any questions, by all means, ask away. All right, I think you guys can see that okay. So basically, to begin with, I imagine most of you are aware that you can actually just now install the PhoneGap CLI completely through npm. So sudo, depending how you've installed node, npm install -g PhoneGap. And if you want, you can actually install a specific version of PhoneGap by just using npm to target 290, 280, 3.0, 3.1. If we release something that's a little broken, you can roll back to a different version. If you don't want to globally install it, you could actually install it to a project too and just run it that way. And what a lot of people aren't aware of is that there's actually a pretty solid, very solid node interface. So if you have a build chain, grunt, or something like that, you can actually just require PhoneGap and generate projects and build projects and do all of that through it. So the goal of this CLI is to integrate with your workflow. It may not be the endpoint for you. You can use it however you want. If you ever need to check out what versions are available, npm info PhoneGap will spew out a whole bunch of information. You can do this on any node module, by the way, but you can see 3.0, 0.14.4. Basically, the version works that it's shipping. This particular version will be PhoneGap 3.0. The second version number is the node module. So if you're using it through grunt, you may be cool with the minor attribute moving forward. It means we patched issues, but we haven't broken any public interfaces. If we add a new public interface, you could go with the minor and be okay. And if we bump the major, then shit's broken. So look through it. Good chance that your grunt probably needs to be updated in some form. We also bring out the RCs. So 3.1.0 for Cordova is due quite soon, which means that the PhoneGap CLI will be bumped to an RC. The code is largely there inside the repository, so it'll just be probably Monday, I'm thinking, when Cordova will be bringing it out, and so PhoneGap will follow shortly after that. To begin with, after you've actually installed it, you can type PhoneGap or PhoneGap help or PhoneGap help, PhoneGap H, and basically it's going to go out of its way to help you. And from there, it's going to spew out its help dialog. And the basic format is like every other command line. PhoneGap, potential options, potential commands. And so some of the common commands would be creating a project, building a project. The concept of build is important. It means that it's going to build it and do nothing else. It's going to compile your code, but not actually do something. So if you're using grunt, for example, you may actually want to compile it and then, I don't know, upload the APK to test flight or something like that so that your users can make use of it. Install is the opposite. Install assumes that you've already built. It's just going to install the target. If there's no target, it's going to fail. And run is the command that you're probably going to use most of the time. Run does a build and install. Think of it as your IDE. There's always a build and install button that you press, and it's always called a run, or at least it is in Xcode. So that's how it is. The interesting part about the PhoneGap CLI is that it supports both local builds and remote builds. And so we've actually encapsulated those commands into these areas, and I'll go into more detail later on about that. And help. Help is something that people haven't really latched onto yet, but help is your go-to. Help followed by anything. You can even type anything followed by help, and it's going to spew out the help dialog for it. So simple example would be PhoneGap help create. and it spews out the details on actually creating a project. And so you can see that you would type PhoneGap create, followed by a path, and you have an optional ID and name. And if you want, you can actually specify the name as a dash dash, the ID as a dash dash. And so some examples would be PhoneGap create, path to my app. PhoneGap create path to my app, but you actually want the ID and the name to be something specific. So if we actually go ahead and do that, we can create our first PhoneGap app really quickly, one command as always, switch into it, and now we're actually inside the Hello World PhoneGap app. It's a little bit different than the Cordova one, but it has 100% used Cordova to generate this project. The nice part about that is that if your buddy is collaborating with you on this project, they can use the Cordova CLI, and you can use the PhoneGap CLI. They can compile locally. If you want, you could use PhoneGap build. You guys can collaborate on the same app, which is nice. PhoneGap or Cordova is very useful if you want to follow the bleeding edge work as well, which may or may not be good. Things sometimes break, but you also get to use really cool stuff. PhoneGap 1 is probably going to be a lot more stable. It's a lot more focused on bringing out regular releases that are much more solid, stamped by Cordova in many ways. So to begin with, we can actually just run our first project. PhoneGap run, followed by the platform. In my case, I'm going to use iOS. Now, when you download the PhoneGap module, got a super low resolution screen here. Let's scale that to 50%. There we go. So when you download the PhoneGap node module, it actually doesn't come with any platform libraries. So it's a very quick download. So the first time you want to build iOS, it's going to go up to Apache server, download the Cordova iOS framework, install it for you, run the proper commands. That way you don't have to worry about it each time. You can see that we've kicked off our very first app, the basic Hello World app. And likewise, if we want, I'm going to kick up my Android stuff here. I think this should work okay. Oh. So I'm going to try to get an Android mirror going so I don't have to, so that you guys can actually see what's going on. I think this should work. There we go. Sweet. All right, let's get this Android device up. So likewise, if we want, we can actually run on Android. So it's detecting the Android SDK environment. It found that I actually have Android's SDK installed locally. It's added the Android platform to this project, compiling it ever so slowly. And eventually, we'll see that it's going to pop up on the device here. Trying to install on a device, it's found that there's actually a device there. Android's always a little slow. For the rest of the demos, I think I'll just use the iOS simulator, of course, but it's up and running. Now, if I actually had my Android device plugged into my computer, but for some reason I actually wanted to install it to the simulator, you can always type PhoneGap run help. And you can see that you can actually target the emulator or the device. So likewise, I could have added emulator. I think I actually alias simulator as well, if you use that word. And it'll install it just to that device, or it would fail if you happen to not actually have simulator on there. And what's really interesting is the detection of your environment. Both with iOS and Android, I have the SDKs installed on my system, so it's installing it on these devices. But when you don't have the platform set up on your system, we detect that and we'll use PhoneGap build. So quickly, I'll just uninstall my Android SDK. All right, so if I witch Android now, we don't have it anymore. So if I do PhoneGap run Android again, it's detecting that my Android SDK, does it exist? It says no. Using the remote environment, in this case, the remote environment is defined as PhoneGap build. Now, what's interesting is I've actually, I have that implemented as a module, so if you wanted, you could create your own build server. And if you matched PhoneGap build's API, you could just shell this out to your own server as well, which I think would be very interesting for people. So it's asking me to log in. You only have to log in the very first time. We save those credentials after that, so you don't have to worry about it, but just showing it for demo purposes here. It's logged in, it's compressing. It's going to be a slow upload unless this internet is really, really fast because of those splash screen images. We'll see how it goes here. Ever so slowly. Anyways, while this gets going, I'm actually going to take advantage of it and show you that up on PhoneGap build, we can actually see our app getting uploaded and getting built up there, which is kind of neat as well. This doesn't happen in a few moments. I'm just going to kill it and then remove the splash screen images. All right, I'm going to kill it. So as you all know, the Hello World demo ships with all the splash screen images that you need. So it's always a massive, massive 7 megabyte starter app, which is unfortunate. So this should go a lot faster. Ever so slowly. I guess in the meantime, I can actually show you guys. You can always follow the project up on NPM as well. If we ever bring out any updates, that kind of thing. And the README file is extremely well documented, so you can see all the details on just how to use this tool. Haven't got around to actually documenting the JavaScript, but if you actually check out the source code, it's all written as JSDoc, so you can actually go through the files, and if we pump it through the correct parser, it'll be okay. That's a to-do. So if we refresh this page, we should see that the PhoneGap app is up on build now. We can see that all of the platforms are building except iOS, which has failed because we don't have the proper signing keys set up on this system. So if we jump back to the terminal, eventually, when you're using PhoneGap build, you typically install through a QR code. It's just it's the easiest way that we figured out how to do it so far. And so when you're in a terminal environment, we decided to add that same kind of experience. So shortly, you'll see that we render the QR code. Actually, yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So we rendered it there, and surprisingly, it works, which I thought was even more amazing. So shortly, I'll just scan it. There we go. Let's jump over. It's found it. You guys can't see, but just below the fold, I'm clicking on the actual link. So it should open up the browser, start the download, and we're up and running. So it's grabbing the app off of S3. Yep, I confirm I'm not doing anything bad. Oh, I think I actually have the same app installed at the moment with the same ID, so I'll get rid of that. Definitely want to get rid of it. Let's just jump back here and quickly scan that or grab that code again. So the idea is more or less that we're trying to match the PhoneGap builds workflow, just so that you can have the same experience through the command line. You can even grab that QR code programmatically if you use it as a node module, so you can render it to an image if you want, or you can do whatever you wish, show it in your grunt process or whatever. Open the app, and then we have the exact same app as before, but we don't have an Android SDK environment, so we built it. Whoops, let's not stretch the screen in such a weird way. There we go. Cool. Yeah, and so that's kind of the general workflow of what it would be. But of course, we know that in 3.0, PhoneGap or Cordova, both of them don't ship with any plugins anymore. It's actually a very lightweight bridge, and that's about it. But we do have a great plugin architecture now, and you can install any of those plugins. So if we jump over to docs.phonegap.com, nice thinking the mobile interface, that's funny. We can check out the device API, and we're actually going to just install and use this device. It's the exact same as the Cordova environment because the PhoneGap CLI is built entirely on Cordova. So if we just edit the file quickly, jump to the bottom. So I'm going to alert something like the platform is window.device. I know I don't have to put the window in front, but I'm the explicit kind of guy. And so we can output that. Let's just do a quick check if window.device is defined. And if it's not, let's just say the platform is unknown. So if we run this again, but on iOS, we should be able to see a message saying that the platform isn't defined, and then we can go ahead and install the device plugin. Let's get rid of that. So platform is unknown. That's awesome. Now let's go ahead and install this device plugin. Likewise, you could install any of your third-party plugins, and as Andrew showed, you can go up to plugins.cordova.io and grab any plugins that are submitted through there, which is pretty cool. So similar in the Cordova world, you would run Cordova plugin add followed by this path. Now, in the PhoneGap CLI, Cordova is the local environment, so we're going to prefix it with local. PhoneGap local, plugin add, this path. So it's going off, it downloads that plugin. It's just using Cordova under the hood, successfully installed that plugin. If we actually look at our project now, we can see that inside the plugins directory, we have the org.apache.cordova.core.device. And so this is the plugin installed right there, and it's been installed to both Android and iOS. And so now if we actually run the iOS environment again, we should see at least that the platform is iOS. There we go. So we've been able to, yeah, it's pretty easy. So hopefully, the hope, of course, is that you'll leverage this kind of environment to install Simon's plugin, to install Ali's amazing WebGL stuff. Like any of these plugins you can now install very easily, which is pretty rad. And likewise, you can uninstall them just as easily. So if you take the device ID or whatever ID that plugin has gave, and you run PhoneGap local remove followed by that, we can, PhoneGap local plugin remove. You can then go ahead and get rid of it. And so again, if we run the iOS environment, we'll see that the plugin is now uninstalled. And so certainly makes development a lot nicer. There we go. We're back to not knowing what the device is, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of possibility from that point on. And then the last thing I want to show, and this is something that we haven't documented yet, I guess, and I think it's incredibly useful, especially because a lot of people are integrating this tool into their build chain. And it's actually the first feature of this tool to have been implemented because of someone's need. Someone was using this inside Grunt, and Phil was awesome enough to listen to that guy's need and implement this feature. So if you check out every single Cordova-generated project, we see that there's a .cordova directory here. This is the configuration directory. And there's actually one in your home directory as well. That one includes any kind of information. In our case, it's the PhoneGap build token we store there so that you can not log in each time. Then inside this .cordova directory, we have a config.json, which just stores generic configuration data. And you're welcome to actually dump whatever you want in there for your app, too. It's a great place just to store various build settings. But what's more interesting, I think, is the hooks directory. And so the hooks directory is inspired through Git. And it has directories for before and after every step that we could break down. So before a build, after a build. We also alias build is compile. We have the after docs, which is actually no longer implemented. Emulate, when you add a platform or when you remove a platform or list a platform, any of those kind of commands, we have them all. So if we actually change into that, the .cordova directory inside the hooks, and let's do before emulate, as we're going in there. So if we actually go into this directory, there's nothing in here, but we can add anything we want. So I'm going to add echo.js. But you could add a Ruby file, a bash file, anything, absolutely anything that you want inside there. Let's go into this, and let's write a quick little Ruby command, or sorry, node command. And so we'll just hash bang it so that we load the node environment. Let's do a console log, and let's say, so the module that fires the hooks, Phil actually named hooker. So the hooker is hooked on hooks we'll use. So we've got that. And just like every Unix environment, you don't have to do this on Windows in the same way, but we're going to set it as executable. And so if I actually just run this command, we can see that we're outputting that the hooker is hooked on hooks, which is pretty rad. One thing that I haven't touched on is that the PhoneGap command can be ran inside any subdirectory. When you run a command, it walks up until it finds a .cordova directory that's valid, and then it actually assumes that that's your project. So inspired, again, very much from Git, and this works, again, with Cordova as well. So we can run the PhoneGap run iOS. If we did this, we're actually not going to see that echo. That echo is hidden down inside the logging level. And so if we enable verbose output, we're going to be spammed with everything from like what Xcode is doing all the way to our command, which is right here, that the hooker is hooked on hooks. And so you can see it's looked up, trying to find a device. It didn't find a device. It's going to use the emulator. And at that point, it discovered that it has one of our hooks. And so we could go here and do this. So I think this is really useful. You could do something like after build, you could upload this to a continuous integration service, hint, or you could do any kind of validation like that. So it's meant to really integrate well into your workflow. And if you're using it from an actual node module rather than a command line interface, you can add functions that can fire on these hooks. And so you can add any kind of anonymous function. You're given a whole bunch of data about what that particular task is doing, where the project is found, any kind of options the user would have provided. So you should be able to do what you need and get your job done. And of course, the app. Sorry? Can you abort? Yeah, so every hook has to, if it's a process, it has to exit with 0. So if it doesn't exit with the exit code 0, then the whole process dies off. Yeah, and likewise, the programmatic interface accepts a callback. So you can do it asynchronous actions, and if you never call that callback, then it never continues. So the only catch is if you want to have multiple hooks on a single process, you got to use a naming scheme that works. So alphabetical or numeric, and 1 dash, 2 dash is the easiest way to go about it. And at a glance, it's super obvious which ones are running in which order. So that's the way. And each hook is fired synchronously. So they all won't be firing at the same time. That way, if you're munging data, if you're, say, concatenating all your JavaScript into a single file to make things load faster or minifying in some way, the other processes or other hooks won't get messed up. So it's pretty cool. That's really it. Like, you can explore all of the commands and do whatever you want, and it's all documented up on our docs as well. If you ever check out the Edge docs, they went a long way in what's going on with the CLI. The moment 3.1 is kicked off, you'll see that that's the default page. So you should be able to get up and running there. The last thing that I want to talk about is how it works in the contributing side of it. And so if we go to github.com/PhoneGap CLI, right there, that's where all the code is actually housed. And we actually have quite an active issue tracker here, so feel free to submit any issues. The catch is that the PhoneGap CLI does virtually nothing. It's a shim, and it'll actually grow smaller and smaller over time. It should never be growing bigger. If you check out the package JSON, the important modules are the Cordova one. Every time you run a local command, we're actually just calling right into Cordova. That's it. So if you're having a problem compiling, or you're having some issue locally, 99% chance that it's actually Cordova and not the PhoneGap CLI. But if you submit an issue to the PhoneGap issue tracker, we have absolutely no problem mirroring that issue to Cordova's issue tracker and getting the bug fixed. And likewise, when you run a remote command, we're actually calling the PhoneGap-build module, which interacts with PhoneGap build's REST API. And the goal is for it to match every public command that Cordova has. And when there are commands that are common between the two, that's when a global command exists. For example, creating a project, running a project, those kind of things. And so if you go to PhoneGap build, I think we prefix it with node, you can see that this is where the PhoneGap build node module is. And so these are where any kind of remote issues would be fixed. This is what generates those QR codes and all that kind of stuff. And so, again, you could actually use this as your own module. You can just require it and just use build and not even use the PhoneGap CLI if you wish. But the point is that we've kind of separated these out. It's 100% compatible with Cordova, which is extremely important to the PhoneGap project. And so you can use either project, and it should be okay. I think that's it. That's really everything that I was hoping to cover on this talk. And so if you wish, I wonder why that's so ugly. That's unfortunate. Let's try it again. There we go. I have no idea what happened there. If you wish, you can always follow me on Twitter at mwbrooks. Ask questions. I'll gladly help you out. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Michael.